Okay. Okay. Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's great to welcome you to the first series in our Navigating Relationships series put on by SD State Health, which I'm a member of, and a great group. I'm Jill Thorngren. I'm Dean of the College of Education and Human Sciences and a part of SD State Health, as I said. I also have a background in counseling, in marriage and family counseling. So I think that's what I'm doing on this particular webinar today. But really excited to work with my colleague and friend, Andrea Bjornstedt, who is an associate professor in counseling and human development. Andrea, maybe a little bit about yourself and your participation today.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm an associate professor, and I've also been a licensed professional counselor for over 15 years. And similar to Jill, my background is marriage and family therapy as well as school counseling. So when I teach, I talk to my students a lot about how I have experience from probably about 5-year-old children all the way. And at some point in my career, I did some counseling in nursing homes. So I have a wide range of experience with counseling diverse individuals.
So I'm going to say all hard questions go to Andrea. She's worked with both ends of the continuum, from children to seniors. So I would also say that Andrea, as your role with SDSU Extension, you've really been on the front lines, I think, of helping deal with mental health during the COVID-19 crisis. So I think you have a taste in a sense of what's going on across the state, and are certainly leading some efforts to help us address that. So looking forward to hearing more about that and your tips. So Andrea and I are excited to hear your questions. That's what this panel presentation is really all about. It occurred to us that over the course of this last year, and it has been almost a year now that we've been dealing with COVID-19, we've changed everything. We've changed the way we teach. We've changed the way we learn. Campus looks different. Our classrooms look different. Some people have worked at home. Some people are doing a hybrid approach. Some of you have little people at home. You've found yourself being homeschoolers, homeschool teachers, and certainly navigating a lot of change. And I think we're doing really well. As I look at what the faculty in our college are doing and what they continue to accomplish amidst really challenging and trying circumstances, I won't say it's easy, but I think in many ways we're knocking it out of the park in terms of work expectations and continuing to make really good experiences for our students. But it occurred to us, how are we navigating home? What are family relationships like? What are couple relationships like? So given that we're coming up on Valentine's Day, it seemed like a good time to maybe throw that out there as a topic. And again, we have some questions that have been submitted in advance, but really interested if you'll use the Q&A feature to let us know how it's going at home. What are some of the challenges and some of the successes that you're experiencing in your home and family relationships? Andrea, I don't know if you want to add to that, or maybe share a little bit about what you're learning from people across the state as you're helping them navigate these times.
Sure. Before I begin a little bit, there are other people on the screen. We're having a little technical difficulty, but just so you're aware that those are other names. But I have a lot of outreach efforts going on across South Dakota, and I think that Jill is right when she says that there are lots of positive things happening. However, there are also people who are really struggling. And, there have been lots of fluctuations in emotions. From when I taught with other people, it's almost as if one day I feel okay, and the next day maybe I'm feeling down. And we have these fluctuating emotions of, especially when social distancing was and not saying that it's not strict now, but with the COVID shots, COVID vaccinations, it seems as if people are starting to breathe a little bit more, that maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel. But there have been lots of fluctuations in emotions, and people have described to me that I feel as if I'm on a roller coaster each day. And I've experienced that roller coaster too. as well. And I share that when I present with others, but it's okay to not be okay. And if you're struggling with something, that's okay too. So this is just really a time for Jill and I to answer any questions and provide any support and encouragement that you might have related to whether it's your relationships with your children, your relationships with your significant other, maybe your parents, your siblings, any type of relationship, friends. If you have any questions about any of those, we're happy to answer.
Andrea, I certainly share that roller coaster feeling. I've gone from, oh my gosh, the depths of despair and I hate this and it's got to change to, oh, well, maybe this isn't so bad. I have a little bit more flexibility in my schedule. I have kind of swung the ends of those, that continuum. And I think what you said is so true that our range of emotions are all valid and legitimate. I think some of the people that I've talked to are worried about maybe stifling their own emotions or holding those in because they're worried about their children. They're worried about maybe loved ones that are struggling. And so there's this sense of, gosh, is it fair for me? I'm relatively healthy or I have it relatively easy. Is it fair for me to have these feelings? And I want to say, yes. No matter what our experiences have been, whether they've been relatively okay or maybe we've lost somebody, we all are grieving on some levels, and we're going to have another session on that and navigating grief. But very typical to experience some sadness, some grief, anger, frustration, and that was just before I came to work this morning in my house. So I think it's important that we acknowledge those feelings. I say to clients and to students when I'm teaching, we have a choice about emotions. We don't have a choice about whether or not we're going to experience them. We have a choice about whether we express them directly or they come out sideways because they're going to come out. So, you can choose my route, which is stomping around the house and slamming doors and hoping that my husband figures out what that is and what I need. Or you can be real direct in expressing, I'm feeling frustrated or I need this. But I think one of the most important things for us to get out today is that it's normal to feel that roller coaster. Sometimes it'll be okay. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're slowing down a little bit, and that's a nice thing. And other times it feels like I've taken on 6 new jobs and I don't know how to do it, and I'm feeling hyper aroused, and I'm just like this, and I can't think straight. So that's some of the questions that I have had or heard around, is it normal? And yeah, there's nothing that's really abnormal in terms of how we're feeling right now, I think.
Jill, we do have a couple of questions that are in the
Awesome.
Okay, so Melissa asked, how do you navigate relationships when you have very different views of how to handle COVID guidelines and restrictions?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to start that or do you want me to?
I guess I'm happy to start. I think I have had similar situations too where people that I am close to have very different views of how to handle those sorts of things. And I think I guess it's helpful to approach it from I need to respect your point of view and you respect mine, and I'm going to follow the guidelines how I feel comfortable and how I want to keep my family safe, and you follow the guidelines on how you want to keep your family safe. And it's really challenging, especially if if this is immediate family, and my immediate family is kind of all over the board with it as well. But I would, that's how I approach it is I just respect someone else's point of view and try my best to follow my values and beliefs and try to do my best to keep my family safe. I don't know about you, Jill.
I like what you said, Andrea, about respect, because I think I think when something is important to us and we get passionate about it, we sometimes think, well, how can anybody else feel or think differently? I value and love this person, and surely we must think alike. And we're finding in this pandemic, not necessarily. People have different views and different values. So I think that piece that you said about respect is the most important thing. And I think I would add to it curiosity. And instead of trying to convince somebody that I'm right and they're wrong, which is my natural tendency, I try to get curious about, okay, well, tell me more. And how did you arrive at that? And truly from a place of wanting to understand. It doesn't mean that I'm going to change my mind or endanger myself from my perspective, but it's like, okay, tell me more. I stand to learn something here. And I think if we can do that, it leads to us maintaining those friendships. And as you said, we can still keep our boundaries, still wear our masks, and make choices about, well, maybe not being around some people if they see it differently or they're acting differently. But I think respect and curiosity are really important pieces, and remembering that that our way isn't the only way. That's another thing that I struggle with. It's like, well, of course I know what to do. Just do what I tell you. Not necessarily. We stand to learn a lot about ourselves and about our loved ones if we ask those questions.
I like what you said, Jill. And this even goes with conflict. For those of you out there that are maybe dealing with some conflict, is you mentioned the word understand. And I try to take that approach with whether it's my children or significant other. I seek to understand. So if I'm in the middle of the conflict, taking a step back, taking a breath, and I tell myself, okay, seek to understand, not just assume.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of how I approach some of these things related to COVID is, social media is full of strong opinions. I don't know about your social media. Mine is full
Mhm.
of very strong opinions. And
Yeah.
some of them raise emotions in me and I get pretty,
Mhm.
pretty heated. But in the back of my mind, my thought is I need to seek to understand. So
Yeah.
um,
That reminds me, Andrea, of one of my counseling caveats that I share with couples, which is seek first to understand and then be understood, right? And that is so hard because I always think, well, if people just understood me, then they wouldn't, they'd understand it, they'd get it. And it's like, no, what can we understand about the other person? And I saw a couple more questions I was thumbing through while you were talking about some people are feeling okay about going out to a restaurant, taking appropriate measures and safety precautions. Some people are feeling disappointed in the choices that their friends are making. And so the questions are around, how can I maintain this friendship? How can I kind of differentiate myself and do what feels right for me and honor this other person? So I think, again, it's really important to do what you said, Andrea, in terms of understanding. It's like we all have basic needs, and they manifest themselves differently. But as human beings, we need to survive. That's kind of our first basic need. But we need connection, we need autonomy, we need to feel competent, we need to have fun. Those are kind of our basic needs. And my sense, and one thing that helps me understand, is that people's behavior is filling a need. And if I can understand what that need is, maybe I can respect it more, and maybe that's enough. Or maybe I can even help meet that need in a different way. It's like our need for freedom didn't go away because COVID-19 descended on us and we had to face some restrictions. So how else can we find that sense of freedom and autonomy that we need to actually survive? And I think one of the other things that helps me is to remember that all behavior makes sense from the perspective of the person engaging it. And so it's like, okay, can I step into their shoes and figure that out? And what can I learn or understand? And it's hard when we have such strong feelings, and it's life and death. This isn't one of those abstract theoretical situations. It is impacting us. And we do sometimes, I think, feel a sense of disappointment or frustration with others. And sometimes we just have to make a choice of separating behaviors from people and make decisions about those relationships.
Yeah, to talk about a little bit about that perspective taking, we can all observe the same situation and have different perspectives and experiences from that situation. And so, and what we're all experiencing together is, these COVID guidelines,
Yeah.
the the social distancing, the mask wearing, all these different things. We're all observing. I mean, it's different but similar
Right.
experiences. But it's a matter of perspective on it. And I did thumb through the questions too, as far as
Yeah.
disappointed in your relationships, your friends, those sorts of things. Any type of work that I do with couples or families, I go back to, okay, what what brought the relationship together in the first
Yeah.
place? So when you're talking about your friends and being disappointed in your friends, and maybe like your friendship is so torn apart you don't know how to repair it,
Mhm.
sometimes it goes back to, okay, what brought the friendship together in the first place? How has that friendship grown? And and is it worth, I mean, sometimes you do have to protect yourself. If your friendship is to
Mhm.
the point where there's so much conflict and so much, like you have all these feelings that are consuming you all the time, taking a step back from the
Yeah.
relationship is important. But how could you work to go back to the beginning of what brought your friendship together?
Yeah. I love that, Andrea, and it reminds me of again something that sometimes I do with couples, which is finding common ground. And I find that if you stay curious enough and you dig hard enough, it's like, well, we all agree on some things. Like I don't know anybody that wants to get sick or wants to be unhealthy. All right. So we each approach that differently or have different perspectives about it. But what's that common ground that brought us together and that we do agree on? Usually there's something. And so to kind of build on that common ground. And we again, I like to say, there's 1,000 different ways of getting there or achieving it, but what is it? What do we both care about? And is that relationship worth preserving? So I love that. I also saw another question pop up about, and I think it's probably one that many of us can experience, which is I'm not feeling a lot of meaning, or I'm not feeling it as worthwhile. I think the person wrote, because it doesn't seem like I'm getting as much done. And I hear that a lot. And I respect that, and I empathize with that. And I also throw back, I'm not sure that we always count everything that we're getting done. It's different. It might look different than it did a year ago. Maybe our research has slowed in some ways, but we've picked up more teaching, or maybe we've shifted from those interactive face-to-face encounters in the classroom, but put a whole lot of work into how do you have that quality experience online. I have seen our staff pivot to continue meeting needs, and maybe it looks different, and maybe it's from home. And I struggled with that a little bit. It's when I was the only one in the office. It's like, what am I doing? Is everybody else getting more done than me? I don't know. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any measure about what I'm doing. So I think sometimes we put high expectations on ourselves and we forget things have changed, and the way we measure our productivity has changed. So I would challenge the person that asked that question, and all of us, to stop and think about, at the end of every day, what did I accomplish? Maybe I stopped and supported somebody that was struggling. Maybe I managed to get my kids to school and in a great learning environment, and complete my job. So I do think we struggle. We're a high performance university. There's no question about it. And we have certain expectations that we place on ourselves. But I think one of the things we need to do is give ourselves a little bit of a break and say, I I've tried to shift this. And when I go to sleep at night, I oftentimes think of, oh, what didn't I do today? And kind of chastise myself. I'm trying to flip that to a did it list instead of a to-do list. Like, what did I do today? What did I accomplish? And I think if we did that, we would find out that we accomplished more than we acknowledge or give ourselves credit for. And Andrea, I know your life has been turned upside down, and I'm not sure how you've been addressing that, or what your experience of that is.
Well, I can definitely relate to the question. Before COVID hit, I was traveling nonstop. I was going 110 miles per hour. Those of you that don't know, I am the mental health specialist in SDSU Extension, so I do travel across South Dakota as well as regionally and nationally. But um, my entire job changed the minute COVID hit, and I've had to look for meaning in other ways. So I reframed it as an opportunity to do other work that I haven't been able to do
Ah,
in a long time. So what is something that you could do that you haven't had time for? So for example, mine was more putting more effort and investment into writing because I was traveling so much, I hadn't had much time to focus on my writing. So it's finding meaning in different ways and reframing it into this is an experience that I mean, well, hopefully we'll never get again. um, but how can I take advantage of something that I haven't had time for and have been putting off? But I do. I have been talking to colleagues about making sure we forgive ourselves for the hard days. Um, we are functioning more on in an online capacity, and it I don't know about all of you guys, but it can burn you out. I mean, this is my fourth Zoom call today,
yeah.
and so forgive yourself for the hard days. If you were really productive one day, celebrate. If maybe the next day it was a hard day and you only got one thing done, that's okay. Forgive yourself for that day, and I think forgiveness goes a long way right now.
Yeah. I agree with you, Andrea, and I think finding our middle. Sometimes we judge ourselves by our worst day, and like that might be one of 10, and we forget that the other 9 days we were pretty darn productive. And even if you averaged it together, you'd still be doing very very well. One of the people, Melissa, thanks, Melissa, asked me to share my GLAD acronym. And it's not mine, it's a positive psychology researcher named Don Altman. But he talks about being glad every day. And here's what GLAD stands for. The G is for gratitude. So, despite some really challenging and tough circumstances, I think we all could agree that there's things to be grateful for. Honestly, I was grateful this morning walking in. Janice, if you're listening, has had the coffee going for me, and I don't have to. I need coffee before I function, and it was there, and so I'm grateful for that little thing that helped my day start off well. So, and I know that we all have little moments that we're grateful for, but that's the G. The L is learning. What did I learn today? I think sometimes we feel like, oh gosh, am I getting stagnant? I haven't been to all the conferences I typically go to. I haven't been able to engage the professional development. I haven't been able to be around my peers and bounce ideas off them. I'm stagnant. No, I would challenge us all to think about things that we learned today, whether it was, well, so I learned today how to start a seminar in Zoom, because never done that before. So thanks, shout out to Mike Lockram for walking us through how we got that done. I mean, it was a little thing that I learned. We're all learning things every day. So what we're grateful for, what we learned, what we've accomplished is the A in GLAD. And so I talked about that a minute ago, but if we stop and think about it, honestly, sometimes getting up and getting ourselves to work is a huge accomplishment. And we do more than that. If we think about the differences we've made, the seeds we've planted, the things that we've actually got done, it's different than we might think. And the D is delight. What is something today that delighted me? Maybe it was a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sunrise. Maybe it was watching your kids play or your pets run around. My dog always delights me because he doesn't know we're in a pandemic. He's just having a great time. He gets lots of extra attention. And it's like sometimes I think, oh, I should be like the dog. He's just full of joy and delight. But the reason that we, might want to practice GLAD is that if we fall asleep thinking about those things, it really helps orient us for what we pay attention to the next day. Our mind and our brains are getting stimulated with so many pieces of information to take in and sort out. And the way our brain literally sorts information is what we focus on and what we tell it is important. So if we say, oh, well, let's focus on things we're grateful for or things we're learning or we accomplished or delight us, that's the stuff we'll start paying attention to. And it really does make a difference as opposed to, oh, what have I lost? What have I not done? How did I fail today? Your brain it'll help you find those things too. If you tell it that that's what's important to you. So I like flipping it and looking for things that we can be glad about. So thanks for asking that question, Melissa. I got to take a break and see if there's any other questions. I've talked too much. Not here. So Andrea, one of the questions that somebody submitted to me in advance, so I will start on that list is, um, how do you divide labor, if you will, roles and responsibilities when we're working at home? And so, especially I think last spring, but it continues in some measure today, if people are working at home or kids are home because they're quarantined, because of exposure or any number of things. One spouse is working at home, one isn't. All of a sudden, those old routines that maybe we had, that, you know, I did this and you did that and the kids do this, they might be upended. So any thoughts or suggestions on how we have those conversations and kind of navigate who does what in this new changed world of ours?
Sure. It actually kind of reminds me of what one of my former professors talked about in his parent education class, the importance of family meetings.
Yes.
And so if you have to renegotiate roles and responsibilities, it's helpful to have a family meeting where everyone is involved, not just you and your spouse, but all of the children are present too. And it's a great time to actually do some of what Jill was talking about with her GLAD acronym, talking about gratitude and those sorts of things. And so my professor would actually encourage an agenda that anyone can add to this agenda, any type of concern or strength they wanted to talk about. So kids could add to this agenda as well. And you hold a family meeting, and everyone takes turns as the leader of the family meeting, even the kids. And so that would be the time to express, hey, this doesn't seem to be working well from my perspective. What does everyone else feel about this? And it would be a time to renegotiate roles and responsibilities, whether it's a new chore chart or maybe you don't have a chore chart, but everybody just kind of knows their tasks. Um, but family meetings, open communication where everyone um, feels as if they're heard, and it's again going back to that understanding, that seeking to understand of everyone feels heard and understood and as if they have a voice in the family. It's a little different than parents just saying you need to do this. It's where it's open communication of different roles and responsibilities, and everyone can kind of discuss it openly.
Andrea, I love that. And it flows from that piece about needs, and autonomy is one of our basic needs. Kids, parents, everybody has that need. So those family meetings provide an opportunity. It's not to say that nobody's going to do the chores. We're just going to stop doing chores during the pandemic. I wish. But what's working for you? What's not? Okay, maybe you have to do the chore you don't really like this week, but we change it up next week. So it really gives as much autonomy as possible in that situation. So I love that.
And don't get me wrong, there are certainly boundaries that you need to establish. Like Jill
Right.
said, chores need to get done. So it can't be that the kids overthrow you and say, we're not doing chores. So there will still be boundaries established, but it's a matter of if those different roles and responsibilities need to be renegotiated. You're giving everyone a voice in how that looks and how to proceed.
Absolutely, because the way that it was working may not. Maybe that was set up around an old schedule when kids had different school hours, or mom and dad have different work hours, or caregivers. That's great. Andrea, another question that has come up is conflict, and somebody mentioning, I find myself having more conflict with my significant other and my kids, and this person said, how much is too much? And I don't think that we have like an amount where if you go over this much, it's bad. I'm reminded a little bit of John Gottman's work, and he's a couples researcher in Seattle. And John Gottman would say, it doesn't matter how much conflict you have in a relationship, it's how many repair attempts you engage in. So, and again, boundaries. He wouldn't say anything goes. You can, fight as much as you want as long as you repair it. But I do think that that's an important piece. Our tempers are maybe a little bit shorter, and it's partly because of those other questions that were asked. We're piling lots of expectations on ourselves. We're trying to function in a really abnormal situation, so the pressures are building up. And sometimes we snap with our kids or with our significant others. And then we get upset or shameful towards ourselves for doing that, and that just makes it worse. So I do think that Gottman brings up a really important point. When you're kind of losing it, or you're finding yourself in conflict, to stop yourself. And a repair attempt can be anything from saying, I'm sorry, let me start over, or can we take a break, or kind of cracking a joke, or anything that says, I'm sorry, I don't want to go here. I don't want to do this. So I don't think there's a magic number. If you find yourself in more conflicts, that tells you that you need something, that something in your life is out of alignment. Maybe you need more connection. Sometimes that's a way people use to connect is through conflict. Maybe you need more fun in your life. Maybe you need, maybe you're not feeling as confident as before. So you're frustrated. So I think, again, what you said, Andrea, forgive yourselves and make sure that you ask for forgiveness for one another. And that never excuses bad behavior or physical violence or anything like that. That's not excusable just because we're in a pandemic. But I think knowing that our tempers might be shorter and repair attempts might be even more important right now.
I also think stress comes out in different ways right now.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize our stress signs. And sometimes the people in our lives recognize our stress signs before we do. And so, for example, when I get stressed, I feel it in my shoulders, my tummy gets tight. I can go from 0 to 100 really fast with irritability, and I have to catch myself. But recognizing your stress signs is important. Sometimes stress comes out as conflict as well. And
Yeah.
right now, with relationships and the social distancing, and sometimes maybe we're used to spending a little time apart, but we're spending more time together. It causes this imbalance in the family system. And there is no, like Jill said, there is no right or wrong amount of conflict. I know that within my family system, I watch for reactions. So, for example, if my kids are having conflict, I take a step back and try to figure out, okay, what might be triggering this conflict? I look at the system as a whole, not just separate relationships, but how are we functioning as a family system? So, especially with kids, it reminded me of something you talked about earlier, Jill, with how with our friends, sometimes they need stuff. We have needs.
Yeah.
With conflict, sometimes we're just not expressing what we need.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're not even aware of what we need. That's the problem.
Right.
And but our spouse is just supposed to guess what we need, right? They should just know what we need. And that doesn't always happen. Or I should know what he needs. Not necessarily true. And so it's a matter of trying to take a step back and gain some self-awareness of what am I really trying to communicate to the other person? What is my need that I'm trying to communicate that's coming out as all this other stuff?
Yeah.
Sometimes conflict is not just the surface issue you're fighting about. It's something much deeper, some other needs not being met that's much deeper.
I relate to that so much. I think of the fights just in my own marriage about dishes or clothes, and it's like, yeah, that wasn't really the issue. Something else was going on. So I love that advice, Andrea. It's like, get to the real point. And one other thing, and I'm drawing from our friend John Gottman again, who talks about the way you start a conversation usually predicts the way that it's going to end. Like, he will say he can tell, this is a little scary, in the first 3 minutes of communication, him watching a couple, he can tell whether they're going to stay together or not because of how the conversation started in those dynamics. So I'm not saying you'll ruin your relationship in 3 minutes, but I am saying that many times I have come home, loaded for bear, as my dad would say, slamming doors and yelling about this, that, or the other. I'm going to get what I really need doing that. So I have also had to say, can I have a do-over? Maybe I need to step back out and try that again. And so, Andrea, if we stop and think about, what do I really need here? And then believe I'm entitled to what I need. Because sometimes we fight that game with ourselves of, oh, I shouldn't, or I don't have this need. It's like, no, knock that stuff off. What do I need? And I'm entitled to ask for it. And then we actually ask for it in a respectful, curious way. It's amazing what can actually happen. And it's not sort of this idealistic way of communicating. It's actually, and I say this to clients and students, complaining is actually a good thing. It actually predicts a strong relationship if you complain, but not criticize. Because a complaint is saying what you want to have different. I mean, I want us to clean the house up, or I don't like to come home to kind of a mess, or I want us to spend more time together. I'm lonely and I'm feeling disconnected. Those are complaints, and those help a relationship. They turn into criticisms, and they turn into something unhealthy when it's, you're a slob and you never clean the house. You don't care about me. You're too selfish to spend time with me. And then I wonder why nobody wants to spend time with me. People defend criticism. So if we're criticizing each other and each other's behaviors and personhood, no, if we're criticizing each other as people versus the behaviors, that creates defensiveness and a lot of distance in our relationships. But complain away, because that's really just stating what you need to feel more connected or more close, or whatever it is that's important to you.
Yeah, that finger pointing that can happen in relationships is very challenging. And
Yeah.
like you said, people get defensive, and you also have to think about how you give feedback in your relationships. So the other day, my sister gave me some feedback on my parenting that, number one, was not solicited. I did not ask her for feedback. And number two, I mean, it came out of left field and I was not prepared for it. So what was my reaction? Defensiveness. So you have to think about the appropriate time and place to give feedback and how it comes across. So when you say you aren't doing this right, is a lot different than saying, hey, I noticed this and I'm curious to know your thoughts on how that went for you. There is a huge difference between the ways that we give feedback. And so I complaining is great. It just becomes, when you said that, all those yous, that's when we start getting defensive, is you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. And what are you supposed to do with all those yous but get defensive and react?
Absolutely. So Henry, what you said just reminded me of what you said earlier in terms of how we give feedback. And what you described to me is like the difference between seeking to understand or be understood. And I don't know your sister, so I don't mean to criticize her, but it's almost like she wanted you to understand what she thought was best, as opposed to saying, hey, what's going on here? Or tell me more about that, kind of trying to understand. So again, that very first thing you said, if we just try to understand, as opposed to imposing the way we think it ought to be, that certainly impacts, I think, the conflict and the way we give feedback. Another question, and I think that every one of us on this panel has experienced this. How do we balance work, family, couple, and individual time during the pandemic? And again, that's always been hard. The pandemic didn't create that. I would say that we've had that question for years and years. But it's exacerbated it, and it's changed the dynamics and restricted some of the options we have. So I think more than ever, and I would reverse the order of the ways that I read that. I said work, family, couple, and individual time. If we take time for ourselves as individuals, it will cascade, I think, into having more time and being more productive in the other areas. So for my staff that are listening, I'm okay with that. I do think we need to take some individual time. Sometimes the first thing that goes is our workout routines or our meditation, our yoga, those kinds of things. I think it's important as we write out our schedule, because we still have 24 hours in a day, to make sure that we do have that time. I think that's important. I work with a lot of couples, or I did in the past, and many of them were parents, and they would say, the kids have got to come first, but we've kind of lost ourselves. And I would argue with them, and maybe some of you would argue with me. I would say, I think the couple needs to come first. That strong, it's okay to have that strong relationship. So kids are absolutely priority. But if you're in a relationship, it's also important, I think, to model for the kids. Taking time for that relationship too is also important. And family and work. So I think it's important to make sure that we don't give up our individual and our relationship goals as we try to manage everything. And the other thing that I would say is really important are routines and transitions. Everything has mushed together. We were talking in our office just today about how the days kind of feel alike, and they do anyway in the winter, but especially now, the days they kind of run together, and the hours in the day run together too. And it's like, wait, am I at work or am I at home? Because telework has become great, but we also find ourselves, I think, working even more in the evenings and at home. I think it's important to have transitions that mark the time from, okay, I'm done working for now, and maybe we pick it up later. That's your own call. But to have a transition that says, okay, let's be done. I had a client who was homeschooling her kids, and she made them go out and walk around the house before they came in for homeschool, because normally they'd walk to school. And so we're going to do that. And then at the end of the day, we're going to go out and walk around again. We're going to mark the end of the school day. So I think creating some new rituals and some new transitions that says, this is family time, this is couple time, this is my individual time, and don't bug me when I'm meditating. I think that's important. So, and Andrea, you have two little ones. You're living this life that I'm talking about. So what does work for you?
Well, I want to go back to something you said. I think it is very important to protect your couple time, because I've heard and have experienced this myself, that it is very much possible to lose yourself in your kids, that you believe your kids come first, and relationships get lost.
Yeah.
If you put your kids first. And don't get me wrong, they are so important. My daughters are my world. But you have to protect your couple time and figure out how to really, that's how you continue to grow together.
Yeah.
As your kids get older, is you still protect that couple time. I, throughout this pandemic, with work and relationships and kids and those sorts of things, I manage my stress by exercising, and my daughters do know that. And so if I didn't get to my workout during the day, I do work out in front of them, but they know that that's my time, and sometimes they join in too. But really trying to figure out something that helps you manage your stress is important, whatever that looks like, and protecting that time too is important. But I was actually thinking, Jill, about the importance of quality time too.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've gotten to the point, and I wasn't always good at this. Believe me, I wasn't always that good at this, but I work really hard now to get my work done during my work hours. And when my girls get done with school and we transition into kid time, I'm done with my work. Unless I have a major deadline I need to meet, and then I express to them that mom has a major deadline, but I work really hard to separate the time of work and my children, because they don't need to always see mom working all the time. And it goes back to quality time with your kids. And I talked about protecting your relationship, but also each child needs to feel quality time with you, and whatever that looks like in your family. Maybe I spend 30 minutes doing this with my oldest daughter, and then I transition to 30 minutes with my youngest daughter. And then maybe we do something together. But, and then if you have a spouse, you can switch time. But that one-on-one quality time is so important. And sometimes mine, especially with my oldest, when I'm tucking her into bed, that's kind of when she word vomits everything. That's all of her feelings and those sorts of things, because that's one-on-one time with me as I'm laying next to her and we're doing our nightly ritual. But quality time is so important with your kids, trying to figure out what that looks like in your family. But it's been a challenge. I mean, I just work really hard to separate my work time from my kid time. But sometimes after they go to bed, I'm up until 1 a.m. working. But again, that time is separated. So
yeah. And I love that, Andrea. I love the piece about having boundaries. And I think that role models for your daughters so well. It's like, yeah, mom works hard, And we play hard, or we spend good time together. That 30 minutes a day is so critical. And I know that the resilience literature really says 15 to 30 minutes a day with a caring adult really makes the difference, in kids, and in the foundation, and the firm skills that they build. So now we have to figure out how you don't stay up till 1 o'clock, because that's important
It's
too,
not
getting
all
good
the
sleep.
time.
Yeah,
It's not all the time.
understood.
I bet a lot of people out here can relate to that.
I'm sure. I heard it. I just today or yesterday, I heard that on average, I heard this on some radio station, we're actually working 2 hours a day more. And it's like, oh my gosh, we were already working a lot of hours, but just taking on new roles. And this is another workshop that's a few weeks down the road, but caretaking, there's been a lot more caretaking, I think, going on throughout the pandemic.
I think it's because we don't realize how hard we're working. Um,
Yeah.
because we're
Mhm.
working online, we think we're not working hard enough. So then we add 2 hours extra onto our day that we normally wouldn't. That
Yeah.
would be punch with whatever you read. But
Yeah.
as far as quality time with the kids, I do want to stress that it's helpful if you allowed them to guide you with what, I
Mhm.
mean, I when I have quality time with my kids, I don't allow the electronics or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's okay, we're going to do something and let's figure out, and lots of times it's Twister, or or some kind of board game, but allow them to drive whatever imaginative play they want to do is helpful.
I love that. There's another choice, another piece of autonomy that little people love. Andrea, I was thumbing back through the questions and noticed that we missed one, and it's a good one. So I want to go back to it. This person is asking, how do they stay grounded when the people in their life or their significant other is feeling depressed or down? And I think that's such a good question, because like we talked about earlier, that roller coaster, sometimes we're up and sometimes we're down. But if overall one of us is feeling like, okay, we got this, we can handle it, but the person in our life or our significant other isn't feeling that, is feeling depressed and anxious, I think there's almost a sense of guilt on the part of the person that's not feeling that way. Like, oh, well, how come I'm doing okay and she's not, or he's not? What are your thoughts about how we can maintain our sense of feeling okay and feeling grounded, and not feel guilty about that if the people in our lives are having a different experience?
Well, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think that when one family member has struggles with depression or anxiety, there is a trickle effect in the family system, and everybody reacts differently to it. I guess I would encourage to look for exceptions, because sometimes if we're the word is called problem saturated. If we always focus on the problem, that can
Yeah.
bring us down even more. And so if we're always focused on our spouse's depression or anxiety, um,
Mhm.
number one, we can lose ourselves, and number two, we can become so immersed in what the concern is that it's hard to separate ourselves and feel good about
Yeah.
ourselves. So I guess I would challenge you to look for the exception. What are the good days? What do those good days look like? And maybe how can we repeat what was different on the good day that we could try to repeat again? Um, so focusing on exceptions and really focusing on that. I know that self-care has been shoved down our throats all throughout this pandemic, but there is some truth to it, and there is definitely some need to it, that we find value in taking time for ourselves, whatever that looks like. And I mentioned that exercise is what I use to take time for myself. So whatever that looks like for you, making sure that you invest time in you separate from your spouse, but really looking for those exceptions and trying to figure out what could be done differently to repeat the exception. I don't know, Jill,
Yeah.
what do you have?
I love that, because sometimes we feel like, especially when we're experiencing depression, that it's every day, all day. And it usually isn't. There are some exceptions. And so being able to build on those, the strengths and the positive moments, and especially if the person writing is somebody who's sort of optimistic and positive, that might be easy for them to, it's like, well, it wasn't all the time. Remember this. So I think that is good. Sometimes we feel like we have to tackle the whole monster, and really, if we build with on the steps or the pieces that are going right, it's easier. So I like that. And I also think there's a piece about acceptance, about the person who is feeling okay, owning that and not trying to make it okay for the other person. Sometimes we do that and we say to the person who's struggling with depression, it's okay, you're fine, you're fine. And it's like, no, they're not. You are and they're not. And so accepting both pieces, accepting that, okay, I'm dealing with this differently and I'm feeling okay. And it's okay if my partner is down. The the last thing that's helpful to a depressed person is saying to them, you're going to be fine, or it's okay, or it's not so bad. That's kind of negating their experience. So I think being able to say, okay, can I get you some help? Can we, do you need to go to therapy, or do you need to talk to somebody? Or can we capitalize on those positive moments when you're not feeling this way and offering help, but also just sort of accepting and allowing maybe this person is having a different experience and that doesn't have to change mine. And it's hard when we live together because depression is kind of contagious. But I think, like you said, making sure that you find time for yourself and strengthening your own sense of optimism and hope and groundedness, and not kind of drawing into that other person's, but also not, telling that person that it's okay if it isn't now. So yeah, that's a challenge.
Oh, I liked your word hope. I think hope is so
Mhm.
important. Hope is so important during this pandemic right now. Hope is what keeps us going.
Yeah.
And I think if your spouse is struggling and you're trying to stay grounded, I would say don't hesitate to seek your own help. Um,
Yeah.
Counseling is not just for people who have are struggling with mental illness. It can be anything from transition issues to just trying to manage your own emotions, just needing someone to talk to. It does. Maybe it's not a counselor. Maybe it's a friend, a colleague. Those sorts of things. Making sure that you have somebody that you can talk to is important as well. As
Absolutely.
your significant other is experiencing their own struggles. So
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Andrea, we have about 7 minutes left, and I welcome any last thoughts you have, but also I'm wondering, you suggested this earlier, maybe asking our audience what successes they've had or what things are working for them. We've tried to answer some tough questions, but there's also, my guess is, a lot of things going right, a lot of things that people have found. So maybe last comments from you, Andrea, and I'll check our Q&A to see what else people want to share before we have to wrap up.
I designed a fun presentation that is all just images and memes. And one of my tasks in this presentation that I've given is, what have you learned about yourself from this pandemic? So that's what I don't know about you, Jill, but I'd like to hear from everyone. What have you learned about yourself from this pandemic? And I did give this presentation to another state's extension organization, and it was really neat to read everything, like the stuff they learned about themselves was pretty cool. So if you could, can they write it in the chat, or does it have to be Q&A?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Write it wherever. We'll check both.
So those of you out there, what is something that you learned about yourself through this pandemic? And please don't be shy.
The chat's lighting up. Let's see. No. Oh, Fabina says to be grateful. Yeah. Tina says that she's not a teacher. Mary Ann, being comfortable being alone. Learning new technology. Patience. Letting go of controlling everything, especially the future. Yes. Yeah. Wow. Wow. We've learned a lot. Andrea, I just checked the Q&A again, and one more person said, unrelated to COVID, can you speak to the challenges of breaking out of the routine around time spent with spouses when both are working? So I'm picturing this. both spouses work, they have kids with busy schedules, and sometimes, as we talked about earlier, a couple times slides by the wayside. You're too exhausted after you've taken care of your job and your kids and the things that you have to do. It's like, you want to be together? I'm exhausted. You want to be together? I'm exhausted and fall asleep. So I think my words of advice are to make that a priority. And maybe it's not every day. Maybe it's like, okay, we're going to run like this for a couple of weeks, but then we're going to have a date night, and everybody else be damned. Can I say that, Mike? I did. We're going to have a date night, and kids schedules and other people's schedules. And so maybe it's not day to day. Maybe it gets pushed out. Maybe it's weekly or every other week. Maybe it's I had a couple one time who locked their kids out of their bedroom on Saturday mornings. And it's like, no, this is our time. We're just, we're going to stay here. We're going to talk. We're going to plan the weekend. We're going to do that. And I think that it drove the kids crazy, but it was good for the couple. Do you have any other tips? You really did a nice job of emphasizing the importance of that, but anything else?
I've been there, done that. So
Yep.
You're so tired. You're so tired. You just want to crawl into bed, right? I guess I would break the pattern is what I would do. Forgive me, I have my counselor hat on right now. I would break the pattern and suggest that don't go to bed. Because maybe it's your routine of we tuck the kids in and then we go lay in bed and we fall asleep. So you tuck the kids in and you decide, consciously make a decision that you're going to do something else besides go lay in bed. That's the only way you're going to break the pattern of that's what we do every night. And that, if we do that every night, then yes, we're going to get sleepy and want to go to bed. So it's really thinking outside the box of, okay, we put the kids to bed. So now we maybe have an hour before we go to sleep. Let's not go lay and watch TV in bed. Let's break it up and do something else. So it has to be a conscious decision to break the pattern.
Nice. I love that. Because you're right. It's one of those things that it's like, well, you're okay. We're okay. We'll just let us go a little bit longer. And so you have to consciously break that pattern and make it a priority. There was one more piece in the Q&A, Andrea, that I just think this is a great thing to end on. Lisa says, one of the things that she's learned is that we are all much stronger than we thought we were. We are overcomers. I love that word. I don't know if I've heard that word, but wow, we are overcomers. We can do this. So yeah. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody that participated and sent questions beforehand and participated during the session. This has been great fun, and really looking forward to sharing more of these weeks. It's every Thursday at 1:00 for the next 3 weeks. So looking forward to that. Andrea, great fun working with you. So I appreciate your expertise and willingness to share all of your great stories and experience too. And I'll let you end it.
Oh, I just thank you, Jill, for your time today. And it was fun bouncing ideas back and forth. And I think I love the way that was ended. We are all strong. And I would just say that if you're struggling, don't hesitate to reach out. This is a great time to send encouraging notes to colleagues or friends, or just even a text saying, hey, I'm thinking about you today. Just those little things can go a long way. I know that I work really hard to try to check in on my family and friends and be encouraging. But again, if you're struggling, don't hesitate to reach out and talk with a colleague or friend. You can reach out to me, non-judgmental space here. That's kind of my last thoughts.
I love that, Andrea. It's connection and compassion. We need to connect with each other. We need to be compassionate with ourselves. So I love that idea of just taking the time, handwrite a note, call somebody. That's great. So, and thanks to you, Mike, I know for all your technical assistance in promoting this. So looking forward to seeing everybody on the next Navigating Relationships workshop. Bye. Thanks, Andrea.